Everett Sterling's house was the biggest and most beautiful one on the whole lake. It had glass walls that shone in the sun and rooms so big your voice would echo. But everyone in town knew a secret about that perfect house. Inside, it was pure chaos. The reason for the chaos had 3 names. They were the Sterling Triplets, 6 years old. A boy, a girl, and another boy. They weren't bad kids, not really. But they were a hurricane of energy and cleverness. They could take apart a remote control car and hide all the pieces in different flower pots before you finished your coffee. They could turn a simple lunch into a food painting experiment on the kitchen wall. And they had a talent for making nannies quit. These weren't just any nannies. These were the best nannies money could find. Nannies who spoke 3 languages, knew child psychology, and had certificates for everything from infant massage to emergency first aid. They arrived with bright smiles and big plans. They left with tired eyes, messy hair, and a story for the nanny agency. One lasted a month. Another made it 2 weeks. One very brave woman packed her bag after just 3 days. Everett Sterling was a genius in the world of computers. He could solve problems that made other people's heads hurt. But the problem of his own children was one he could not crack. He loved them, but he was running a huge company and the house felt like a battlefield he was always losing. He missed his wife, their mother, every single day. He saw that same missing feeling in his children, but it came out as wildness, as noise, as pushing every single boundary they had point one morning. After the latest nanny had left a polite but firm resignation note on the marble countertop, Everett made a phone call. His voice was flat with defeat. The woman on the other end from the agency side. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "we have sent you our very best, the top of our list. Perhaps what you need is not the best on paper. Perhaps you need someone different." Everett rubbed his forehead. "What do you mean, different? I have a woman on my books. She's not a typical career nanny. She's worked as a housekeeper, a maid, a helper in families for over 30 years. She's older. She's calm. She's seen everything. She doesn't have a degree in child development, but she has a degree in life. Her name is Clara Jones. She is available, and she is willing to meet you." Everett was skeptical. A maid? To handle the triple tornadoes? It seemed like sending a small boat into a storm, but he had no other options left. "Fine," he said. "Send her for an interview tomorrow." The next day, Clara arrived. She didn't drive up in a new car. She took the bus and walked up the long driveway. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a simple, clean dress and a cardigan. Her hair was neatly styled, and she carried a small, old-fashioned handbag. She looked around the grand entrance not with awe, but with a quiet, noticing kind of look. Everett took her into his office. He started explaining the situation like he always did. He talked about the children's schedules. Piano lessons at 3, tutoring at 4, only organic snacks. He listed the rules. No more than 1 hour of screen time. Toys must be kept in the playroom. Bedtime is strictly at 8. Clara listened. She nodded slowly. She didn't take notes. When he finished, there was a quiet moment. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and steady, like a river running deep. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That all sounds very organized." She paused. "Might I ask you something? Could I spend a little time with the children? Just an hour by myself, so I can see for myself." Everett was surprised. Most nannies wanted to impress him with their plans. This woman wanted to see the children first. He agreed, mostly out of curiosity. He led her to the giant playroom where the triplets were, as usual, engaged in 3 different kinds of mild destruction. One was building a tower just to knock it down loudly. Another was drawing, but not on paper. The third was trying to see if toy cars could roll up the wall. Everett introduced her quickly. "Children, this is Clara. She's going to visit with you for a bit." He then retreated to his study, where he could watch them on the security monitor. He waited for the screaming to start, for the protests, for the testing of this new person. But Clara didn't walk in and start giving orders. She stood at the doorway for a moment, just watching. Then she walked calmly to a clear corner of the room and sat down on the floor. She opened her handbag and took out a few simple things. a deck of cards with faded pictures, a wooden flute that looked well used, and a piece of smooth, colored cloth. She didn't look at the children. She just picked up the flute, put it to her lips, and began to play. It wasn't a fancy song. It was a slow, simple tune, a little sad but also sweet. It was the kind of music that didn't fight with the noise. It just existed alongside it. The change wasn't instant, but slowly, one by one, the children's noisy activities lost their steam. The tower builder stopped crashing blocks. The wall artist put down the crayon. The car driver let his car roll back to the floor. They didn't run to her. They just turned. They listened. The frantic energy in the room, for the very first time that Everett could remember, began to settle, like dust in a sunbeam. Everett leaned closer to the monitor. He didn't understand what was happening, but for the first time in a very long time he felt a tiny, fragile thing in his chest. A flicker of hope. Everett hired Clara on a trial basis. He was still unsure, but that hour of quiet music had been the most peaceful one in the house for years. He gave her the big, sunny room on the third floor that the other nannies had used. She unpacked a single, small suitcase. She put a photograph of two young men on the dresser and a well-read Bible on the nightstand. That was all. The first morning, the children were ready for war. They had a system. They would break the new person quickly. At breakfast, the girl poured her orange juice slowly, in a long stream, right onto the polished wooden floor. She looked at Clara, waiting for the shout. Clara was at the counter, buttering toast. She glanced over. "I see that," she said, her voice calm. "Juice is for drinking. The floor cannot drink it. There's a cloth under the sink." She went back to the toast. The little girl stood there, confused. The expected storm hadn't come. After a long minute, the girl shuffled to the sink, got the cloth and mopped up her own mess, grumbling quietly later. The two boys decided to have a yelling contest in the living room, seeing who could scream the loudest. It was an ear-splitting noise. Clara walked in, didn't try to shout over them, and simply opened the giant window. From outside, the sound of a lawnmower from a neighbor's yard drifted in, and the call of some birds. She pointed outside. "Listen," she said, just loud enough for them to hear. "That blue jay is awful mad about something. I wonder what got his feathers ruffled." The boys, distracted, stopped screaming to listen. The yelling contest was forgotten. She didn't use the fancy, colorful schedules the last nanny had made. She made a simple, plain one with pictures she drew herself. A little bed for bedtime, a book for story time, a carrot for snack time. She put it on the fridge at their eye level. "This is our map for the day," she told them, "so we don't get lost." The biggest weapon in the children's arsenal was the public tantrum. They would throw themselves on the floor in the grocery store or the park, screaming and kicking, a performance designed for an audience. The old nannies would get flustered, red-faced, trying to bargain or threaten. The first time it happened with Clara, they were in the cereal aisle. The boy wanted the sugar-filled one with the cartoon mascot. Clara said no, they were getting the plain oats. He took a deep breath and flopped down, ready to wail. Clara didn't look at him. She didn't beg. She simply turned to his brother and sister and said, in a normal talking voice, "I need some helpers. My eyes aren't as good as yours. Can you two find me a box that has a picture of a red barn on it? I think it's around here somewhere." Intrigued by the mission, the other two scurried down the aisle, searching. The boy on the floor, his audience gone, stopped mid-scream. He peeked through his fingers. No one was watching his show. It wasn't any fun. After a moment, he got up, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and went to help look for the red barn. Slowly, day by day, Clara chipped away at the chaos. She replaced Time Out with the cozy corner, a nook with a big pillow and a basket of worn picture books. "Sometimes our feelings get too big for our bodies," she explained. "We just need a quiet place to let them settle down for a minute." To everyone's surprise, the children started using it on their own. She didn't talk to them like they were problems to be solved. She talked to them like they were small people. She'd say things like, "That block tower is impressive. How did you get the top one to balance?" Or that's a mighty serious drawing. Tell me about it. One week in, Everett came home early from work, bracing for the usual report of disasters. He found the house quiet. A panic shot through him. Quiet was often the worst sign. He followed the sound of soft humming to the kitchen. All three children were standing on chairs pulled up to the big island. They each had a lump of dough in front of them. Clara was showing the girl how to roll it out. Now, push gentle, like you're petting a kitten, she was saying. Flour was everywhere. On their cheeks, on the floor, in the boy's hair. They were completely focused, their little tongues poking out in concentration. They were making a mess, but it was a peaceful, purposeful mess. They were making bread. Clara looked up and saw Everett. She gave a small, quiet smile and then went back to helping the boy shape his dough into a lopsided ball. Everett just stood there in the doorway of his own kitchen, feeling like a stranger in a new and foreign land. A land that, for the first time, felt like it could possibly be a home. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked back to his office, the image of those flour-dusted, focused little faces stuck in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, this was going to work. The children decided it was time for the big test. Clara had been with them for almost a month. A record. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't quit. She was like a quiet tree in the middle of their storm, just standing there, not moving. They didn't understand it, so they planned their masterpiece. They waited for a Thursday afternoon. Clara always did the laundry on Thursdays. She would be in the basement for a little while, moving clothes from the washer to the dryer. That was their window. They worked with the speed and silence of little commandos. They emptied every bin in the playroom. Legos, blocks, toy cars, dolls, puzzle pieces. It all went into a giant, teetering mountain in the very center of the living room. They pulled every cushion from the sofas and chairs and threw them on the pile. They took every book from the bottom shelves and tossed them like leaves on top. It was a glorious, terrible monument to chaos. Then, giggling and breathless, they hid behind the big velvet curtains by the window to watch. They heard Clara's soft footsteps coming up the basement stairs. They heard her stop in the doorway. There was a long, long pause. The girl had to clamp a hand over her own mouth to keep from laughing. This was it. This was when the calm would break. This mountain of mess would be the thing that finally made Clara's eyes go wide, that made her voice rise, that made her throw her hands up and walk out. But the sound they heard next was not a gasp. It was not a cry of frustration. It was a simple, soft sigh. Then they heard the rustle of fabric. Peeking through a crack in the curtains, they saw Clara do something unbelievable. She carefully stepped around the edge of the mess. She went to their favorite reading chair, the one that was clear because it was too heavy for them to move. She sat down in it. She reached over to the one small side table that was still neat, and she picked up the book they had been reading together the night before. She opened it to the marked page, and then, in her clear, steady voice, she began to read aloud. She read about the brave mouse setting off on an adventure. Her voice didn't sound angry or stressed. It sounded the same as it always did, warm, interested, as if the giant volcano of toys and cushions beside her was nothing more unusual than a potted plant. The children behind the curtains were utterly confused. This was not part of the plan. They nudged each other. What was she doing? Why wasn't she mad? Clara read a full chapter. She closed the book with a soft clap. She looked thoughtfully at the mountain of chaos. Then she spoke, not to them, because she didn't know where they were, but just to the room. My, she said quietly. This looks like the work of three very loud feelings. She stood up and walked over to the pile. She picked up a sofa cushion and looked at it. You know, she said, in my house growing up, when feelings got too big and too loud, we didn't make a mess. We made a fort. A fort is a good place to put loud feelings until they get quieter. She started to work. She took the long, heavy curtain from the dining room doorway. She draped it over the back of two chairs she pulled near the toy mountain. She carefully used some of the bigger couch cushions to make walls. She was building a tent, a cave, right there in the middle of the living room, using their mess as the structure. The children couldn't stand it anymore. Their curiosity was stronger than their need to hide. First the girl crept out. Then one boy, then the other. They stood there, watching her. Clara didn't scold them. She didn't even look surprised to see them. She just nodded toward the fort. "It needs an entrance. Can you make a good doorway with those pillows?" Slowly, unsure, they started to help. They moved pillows. They held the blanket up while she tucked it in. In 10 minutes, the monstrous mess had been transformed. It was now a secret, shadowy cave, glowing from within by a small lamp Clara had plugged in. She crawled inside first. "Plenty of room in here." Her voice came out, muffled and inviting. One by one, the children crawled in after her. It was cozy and dim inside, smelling of fabric and old books. They all sat in a little circle. The youngest boy, his voice small in the quiet, finally said what they were all thinking. "Aren't you mad at us?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Mel? No. I was wondering what those loud feelings were all about. Sometimes, when we miss someone very much, or we feel a big change, it comes out looking like a big mess." The little girl, her face half hidden in the dim light, spoke next. "Our mom used to build forts." She hadn't said that word, mom, out loud to a new person in a very long time. Clara's voice was softer now, blending with the shadows. "I know about missing a mother," she said. "I was 10 years old when we lost ours. I had 2 little brothers. One was 5. One was just 3. I had to help raise them after that. We made a lot of forts. They were our safe place. In the quiet of that makeshift tent, built from rebellion, something shifted. The children saw her not as the maid, not as the nanny, but as a person. A girl who had lost her mother, too. A sister who had taken care of little brothers. She wasn't just there for the rules. She was there because she understood the loud feelings that had nowhere else to go. They all sat together, not saying much, just being in the quiet of the fort, until the light outside the windows began to turn the color of evening. The day after the fort, something in the air of the big house was different. It wasn't a sudden change you could point to, like a new piece of furniture. It was quieter, but not an empty quiet. It was the quiet of people thinking, of a storm that had finally passed and left calm behind. Clara began to slowly, gently, pull their world away from screens and schedules and into the rhythm of real things. She didn't announce it. She just started doing it. One rainy afternoon, when they usually would have been fidgeting for tablets, she brought a big, old bowl into the kitchen. "Can't go outside," she said. "Good day for making something with our hands." She showed them how to measure flour, not with fancy cups, but by counting spoonfuls together. She let them crack eggs, fishing out any little bits of shell with careful fingers. She showed them how to stir batter, their small hands wrapped around the big wooden spoon. The boy who loved to crash towers found a better way to make things fall, by tapping a spoon on the edge of the bowl to get every last drop of batter. They were learning numbers, they were learning how things mix, but to them, they were just making banana bread. The smell that filled the house was warm and sweet, a smell that hugged you. Trips to the grocery store stopped being a chore. Clara turned them into a game. She would give each child a simple list, not with words, but with drawings or little boxes to check. One was in charge of finding 3 green things. Another had to find something that comes in a box with a cow on it. The third had to count 5 round fruits. They would dash through the aisles not to cause trouble, but on a mission, their eyes scanning shelves with serious purpose. They were learning colors, shapes, and numbers, but it felt like a treasure hunt. She introduced quiet time in a new way. It wasn't a punishment. It was just a part of the day, like lunch. After their morning activities, she would say, "All right now, bodies need to rest. Minds need to wander." She would set up 3 little nests on the big rug in the living room, a blanket, a pillow for each of them. Sometimes she put on very soft, gentle music. Sometimes it was just the sound of the clock ticking. She would sit in her chair with her own mending basket, darning a sock or sewing a loose button. She didn't force them to sleep, just to be still. And often, lulled by the peace and the soft sound of her needle going in and out of the fabric, 1 or 2 of them would drift off, their breath becoming slow, and even she taught them old songs. Not nursery rhymes from a computer, but the songs she said her grandmother taught her. Simple songs with hand claps and knee slaps, songs that told little stories about animals or the weather. The children loved the rhythm. They would sit on the floor facing her, trying to get the clap pattern right, giggling when they messed up. The songs filled the air with a happy, human noise, a sound of togetherness. Everett noticed. How could he not? He came home, and instead of finding a new disaster, he might find them all at the kitchen table, their heads bent over a giant puzzle. Or he'd hear the slap-clap slapping of a hand game from the sunroom, followed by real, clear laughter. One evening, he walked in and found the living room empty and quiet. A small panic rose in his chest. He hurried through the downstairs rooms until he saw the light from the kitchen. All three children were sitting on the floor, a big, old colander between them, filled with fresh green beans. Clara was in a chair beside them, showing the girl how to snap off the ends. "Just a little bend," she was saying. "Listen for the snap. That's the sound of it being ready." The children were completely absorbed in the simple, satisfying task. Their small fingers worked carefully, each snap a tiny, crisp sound in the quiet kitchen. A bowl of snapped beans was growing in the center of their circle. They weren't just snapping beans. They were learning where food came from, they were helping, they were part of a small, important job. Everett stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching. He saw the focused look on his son's face as he examined each bean. He saw his daughter carefully lining up her snapped pieces. He saw the calm on Clara's face as she guided them, her hands moving with a slow, practiced ease. This was not a scene from the chaotic, lonely house he used to come home to. This was a scene from a home. A real one. He didn't say anything. He didn't want to break the spell. He just turned and went to his office, closing the door softly behind him. He sat at his big, expensive desk, surrounded by screens showing graphs and numbers from his empire. But the picture in his mind was the one from the kitchen floor. The simple circle of people, the bowl of green beans, the quiet, shared purpose. For the first time in a very long time, the emptiness inside him didn't feel quite so vast. It was starting to be filled, not with noise or things, but with the soft, steady snap of green beans, one after another. The real test came in the middle of a busy Tuesday. It was the day of Everett's biggest charity event of the year, the Tech for Tomorrow Gala. The house buzzed with a different energy. His assistants rushed in and out. A tailor arrived for a last-minute adjustment to his tuxedo, and the quiet routines of the day were pushed aside. The children felt it. The change in the air. The feeling of being an afterthought on a day that was about their father's other world. They grew clingy and sour. Clara had promised them a special movie night with popcorn to make up for their father being gone. They had picked out the film together. But an hour before Everett was to leave, his assistant came to Clara with an apologetic look. The young woman who sometimes helped on weekends, a college student, had arrived. There had been a mix-up. Everett insisted Clara attend the gala as well, as part of the household staff. He thought he was being kind, giving her a night out at a fancy event. Clara saw the children's faces fall. Their movie night with her was canceled. They were being left with the weekend girl, who was nice but was a stranger. "It's just for a few hours," Clara told them, kneeling down. "You'll have fun. We'll have our movie tomorrow, I promise." But their eyes were dark with disappointment and a flicker of old fear. The fear of being left. Everett, distracted and running late, gave them all quick, stiff hugs and left in a blur of black cars. The house felt huge and hollow. The weekend sitter, trying her best, suggested they play a game. The children ignored her. They went upstairs to their playroom and closed the door. They didn't want a game. They felt loud feelings coming. The big, messy kind they used to have before Clara came. Downstairs, the sitter checked her phone, thinking they were just playing. But upstairs, the children had a different idea. They remembered the panic room. Their father had shown it to them once, a small, safe room behind a bookcase for emergencies. It had a thick door that locked from the inside. To them, it wasn't a safe room. It was the quietest, most hidden place in the whole house. A perfect place to hide their loud feelings away from the strange sitter. They pushed the bookcase door open, just like he showed them. They went inside the small, plain room with the single bench and the emergency phone. Then they pushed the heavy door closed. It locked with a solid, echoing click. First, it was fun. They were hidden. But then the little girl reached for the handle to go back out. It wouldn't move. They pushed. They pulled. Nothing. In their game, they had forgotten how the lock worked. The reality settled over them, cold and heavy. They were trapped. The air felt still. The younger boy's lip began to tremble. Downstairs, a silent alarm, connected to the security company and Everett's phone, began to blink. The sitter's phone buzzed with a security alert she didn't understand. She ran upstairs, found the playroom empty, and saw the open door to the panic room. Her calls through the door were met with scared silence. Panicked, she did the only thing she could think of. She called Everett. At the gala. Everett was in the middle of his speech. He saw his phone light up on the podium. Not once, but over and over. His assistant, seeing the panic on his face, grabbed it. Her own face went pale. She whispered in his ear, "It's the house. The children. They've locked themselves in the panic room. The sitter doesn't know the code. Security is on the way." A cold dread washed over Everett. Images flashed in his mind. His children terrified in that little room. Fire trucks, strangers breaking down the wall, the story in the newspapers. He mumbled an apology into the microphone, his speech forgotten, and practically ran from the ballroom. The drive home was the longest of his life. He imagined the worst. He pulled into the driveway, expecting flashing lights and chaos. But the house was dark and quiet. No security cars. No noise. His heart hammered against his ribs. Had something terrible happened? He threw the front door open. The weekend sitter rushed to him, her face streaked with tears. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. Where are they?" he demanded, his voice sharp with fear. She pointed a shaking hand toward the back of the house. She came. She got them out. They're in the back." "Who came?" "The police." "No," the sitter said, her voice full of wonder. "Clara." Everett walked through the silent house to the big glass doors that led to the back garden. He looked out. There, by the edge of the lake under the starry sky, was a circle of light from a small lantern. He saw Clara. She was sitting on a big, worn patchwork quilt. And around her, leaning against her, tucked under her arms and with their heads in her lap, were his 3 children. They were wrapped in blankets. One was fast asleep. The other 2 were looking up at the sky, their bodies soft and relaxed. Clara was speaking softly, her voice a gentle murmur that mixed with the sound of the water lapping at the shore. The security system was disarmed. The crisis was over. It had been handled not with sirens and codes, but with a quiet presence. Everett stood there in his tuxedo, the night air cool on his face, and watched the still, perfect picture of peace by the lake. The astonishing thing wasn't a grand act. It was the simple, powerful fact that when the children were most scared, it was her they called for. And she came. Everett stood by the glass door for a long minute, just watching. He felt like he was looking at a painting, a scene from a life that wasn't his. The tight knot of panic in his chest slowly loosened, replaced by a deep, swelling feeling he couldn't quite name. It was part relief, part awe, and a big part of something else. A kind of sadness that he hadn't been the one to bring that calm. He finally stepped outside. The cool grass was damp under his polished shoes. As he got closer, the children stirred. The boy who was almost asleep opened his eyes. The girl looked up. There was no fear on their faces now, just a quiet tiredness. Clara looked up too. She didn't jump up or make excuses. She just gave him a small, quiet nod, like she'd been expecting him. "How?" Everett started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. The alarm went off. The sitter said they were locked in. Clara gently shifted so the sleeping child was more comfortable. "They were," she said, her voice low so as not to disturb the quiet. "They got scared with the new sitter and hid. They called me." She said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "They called you?" Everett repeated. He looked at the old, corded phone by his chair inside. "They had her number memorized." "The little one did," Clara said, smoothing the hair from the sleeping child's forehead. He was frightened. He just said, "Clara, the door won't open." So I came back. Everett tried to picture it. Her leaving the glittering gala, getting in a taxi or a bus, coming all the way back here. But the code, the security company, I didn't need the code, she said. I talked to them through the door. They know my voice. I told them exactly which button to press, the one with the little green light they could see if they put their eye to the crack. They pressed it. The door clicked open. That was all. No drama. No forced entry. Just the sound of a voice they trusted, giving clear instructions in the dark. Everett slowly sat down on the grass near the quilt, his expensive tuxedo seeming silly now. He felt utterly exhausted. I thought it would be a huge thing. Fire department news. Clara shook her head. They just needed to know someone who loved them was on the other side of the door. That's all. The words hung in the night air. Someone who loved them. She had said it so plainly, without any weight or expectation. It was just a fact to her. The little girl, nestled against Clara's side, spoke sleepily. She told us about the stars, she whispered to her father. She said the big one over the lake is like a lighthouse, watching over everything. Everett looked up at the sky, which he rarely did. The stars were sharp and clear out here, away from the city lights. He looked back at Clara, this woman who had walked into his chaotic, lonely world and had done something no contract, no salary, no set of rules could ever do. She had built a bridge of trust, brick by quiet brick. Until his children saw her as their safe harbor, he thought of all the highly qualified nannies with their perfect plans. They had tried to manage the children, to control the environment. Clara hadn't tried to control anything. She had just built a connection. She had seen the scared, missing heart inside each of them, and inside this big empty house, and she had quietly tended to it. "Thank you, Clara," he said, and the words felt terribly inadequate. They were just sounds. How do you thank someone for giving you back the feeling of home? Clara just nodded again, looking down at the children. "They're good children," she said softly. "They just needed someone to be a steady place for a while." Everett understood then that the astonishing thing the title had promised wasn't a single act of heroism. It was this. It was the quiet consistency that had led a frightened little boy in a dark room to call for her. It was the trust that made 3 unruly children listen for her voice and press the button that would set them free. It was the love, steady and unasked for, that now had them sleeping peacefully under the stars, their loud feelings finally quiet. He sat there on the damp grass, under the wide night sky, and for the first time since his wife died, he didn't feel the crushing weight of being alone in this. He was sharing the watch, and for now that was enough. The next morning, the house didn't feel like it had been through a crisis. Felt calm. Sunlight came through the windows and fell on the floor in warm squares. The children, tired from their late night, were moving a little slower, a little softer. They helped Clara set the table for breakfast without being asked. The quiet clink of plates the only sound. Everett came down later than usual. He was still in his casual clothes, not the sharp suit. He watched them from the doorway. The girl was telling Clara about a dream she had about the lighthouse star. One boy was carefully pouring juice, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. The other was passing the buttered dish to his brother. It was an ordinary scene, but to Everett, it was a miracle. A peaceful, everyday miracle. After breakfast, he asked Clara if he could speak with her in his office. She followed him in, her hands folded in front of her simple dress. She didn't look nervous. She just waited. Everett didn't go behind his big desk. He stood near the window looking out at the lake. "Clara," he began, then stopped. He had practiced words like compensation and retention bonus in his head, but now they sounded hollow, like he was trying to buy what she had given them. He turned to face her. "What you did last night," he started again. "What you've done since you got here, I don't even have the right words for it. I want to offer you, I need you to stay, not just as a nanny, as part of this family.
À permanent part.
I'll double your salary. I'll give you whatever time off you need. Your own car. Anything." The words tumbled out, him trying to fix it with the tools he knew. Money, things, benefits. Clara listened quietly until he was finished. She looked at him with those calm, seeing eyes. There was no spark of excitement at the offer of more money. No flash of pride. She just tilted her head a little. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice as steady as it had been with the children. "Thank you for saying that. But I don't need a different title or a car." She paused, choosing her words carefully. The children, they don't need another thing to buy them. They just need someone to be there, to see them. I can do that from the room I'm in or from a mansion. The place doesn't matter. Everett felt his face grow warm. She had seen right through his offer. He wasn't offering what she valued. He was trying to put what she did into a contract. "But I want to show you how grateful I am," he said, his voice quieter now. Clara nodded slowly. "The best way to show me is to keep doing what you started doing last night." He looked at her, confused. "What did I do last night?" "You sat on the grass," she said simply. "You didn't rush in and shout. You didn't try to take over. You just sat with us. You were with them. That's what they need from you. Not more of my time. More of yours." Her words landed in the quiet room, heavy and true. Everett looked down at his hands. He was a man who built empires, but he had been afraid to build a connection with his own children. Clara hadn't just been building a bridge to the children. She had been building a bridge to him, too, showing him the way across. "So you'll stay?" he asked, the fear of her leaving suddenly sharp in his throat. A small, real smile touched Clara's lips for the first time. "Mr. Sterling, those children already have a permanent place with me," she said. "And it seems I have one with them. That was settled last night in the dark by the lake. We don't need to sign a paper for it. It wasn't a job acceptance. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of a bond that had already been forged, not out of duty, but out of quiet love and fierce, simple trust." Everett felt a tightness in his chest release, a tension he had carried for years. He just nodded, unable to speak. Later that day, he found himself in the playroom. The children were building a fort again, but this time with laughter, not rebellion. They were using sheets and pillows from their own beds. They saw him hovering in the doorway. "Dad," the girl called out, "we're making a castle. The cushion is the drawbridge. Can you help hold this blanket up?" Everett hesitated for only a second. Then he walked in, kneeled on the carpet, and took the corner of the heavy blanket. He held it up high as they fastened it to the back of a chair. He was inside the fort with them, in the dim, cozy light. He smelled the familiar smell of his children, of clean laundry, and of the simple, good life he had almost missed from the doorway. Clara passed in a plate of the banana bread they had made together a few days before. She didn't come in. She just handed it in and caught Everett's eye. She gave that same small, quiet nod. He understood. His job wasn't to manage anymore. It was to hold up the blanket, to be there inside the fort, to stay. The grand house by the lake was finally, completely, a home, and its foundation was no longer just concrete and glass, but something much stronger. The quiet understanding between a lost father, 3 once lonely children, and the woman whose simple, astonishing gift was knowing how to build a family out of the pieces that were left.